Grinding in silence is often misunderstood. People think it's about secrecy, about hiding plans, about moving in the shadows because you're afraid someone will steal your idea. But that's not the truth. The truth is much deeper. Grinding in silence is about protecting belief. Because belief is fragile in the early stages. It doesn't collapse from failure as often as it collapses from noise. At the beginning of any meaningful journey, belief is all you have. There is no proof yet, no results, no applause, just a quiet conviction that something could work if you stay with it long enough. And here's the uncomfortable reality. Most people don't know how to handle belief without evidence. Not because they are bad people, but because humans are wired to trust what they can see, measure, and compare. When there's no visible progress, uncertainty makes people uneasy, and uneasy people tend to speak. They ask questions that sound supportive but carry doubt underneath. Is this really working? Do you think this is realistic? What's your backup plan? These questions aren't always meant to hurt you. Sometimes they come from concern, sometimes from fear, sometimes from their own unfulfilled dreams. But regardless of intent, the effect is the same. Every question, every opinion, every raised eyebrow places weight on your belief. And belief, when it's young, cannot carry that much weight. That's why silence matters. Silence gives belief room to breathe. It allows you to test ideas without defending them. It lets you fail privately, learn quietly, and adjust without an audience narrating your mistakes. When you work in silence, you're not avoiding accountability. You're choosing the right kind of accountability, the one between you and your purpose. There's a reason why announcing goals feels good but rarely leads to results. The moment you tell people what you plan to do, your brain receives a small hit of validation. You get encouragement before you've earned it. And that validation can trick you into feeling like progress has been made when it hasn't. Grinding in silence removes that illusion. There's no applause to lean on, no reassurance to distract you, only the work, and the work is uncomfortable because when you're silent, you're alone with your doubts. You hear your own thoughts more clearly. You can't outsource confidence to other people's opinions. You have to decide again and again whether this path is worth continuing without anyone cheering you on. That's not weakness, that's strength being forged. Here's the paradox. The same people who question you early will celebrate you loudly later, not because they changed, but because the conditions changed. Once results appear, belief is no longer required. Proof takes over. And humans love proof. Proof removes risk. Proof removes the need to imagine. Proof gives people permission to support you without feeling foolish. So when you grind in silence, you're not trying to prove something to others, you're proving something to yourself. You're building internal certainty instead of borrowing external confidence. And internal certainty lasts longer. Think about it. If your motivation depends on being understood, what happens when you're misunderstood? If your confidence depends on being supported, what happens when support disappears? Silence trains you to operate without those crutches. It forces you to ask a harder question. Would I still do this if no one ever clapped? That question changes everything. Because when the answer is yes, you stop needing permission. You stop needing agreement. You stop explaining yourself. You realize that belief doesn't grow by being shared too early. It grows by being honored privately. Like a seed underground, it doesn't need attention. It needs protection. And this is where many people get it wrong. They assume silence means isolation forever. It doesn't. Silence is a phase, not a personality. It's what you choose before the work speaks for itself. You're not cutting people off, you're cutting distractions out. You're not hiding, you're preparing. The strongest leaders, creators, and builders didn't start loud. They started focused. They didn't convince people with words, they earned belief through consistency. By the time others noticed, the foundation was already solid. That's why their success didn't collapse under attention. It was built without it. So if you feel misunderstood right now, if you feel like no one sees what you're trying to build, that's not a sign you're failing. It's often a sign you're early. And early is quiet by nature. Protect that quiet. Protect your belief from opinions that haven't earned the right to shape it. Protect your vision from people who only understand outcomes, not process. Protect your energy from conversations that demand explanations instead of effort. Because one day the silence will end. Not because you spoke louder, but because the results spoke for you. And when that happens, people will say they always knew. They'll say they always believed. Smile politely. Not because you're bitter, but because you understand something now that you didn't before. Belief doesn't need an audience. It needs commitment. At some point in the journey, there's a realization that quietly settles in. It doesn't arrive dramatically. There's no announcement. Just a moment where you look around and notice the room feels emptier than you expected. The calls slow down. The encouragement fades. And that's when it becomes clear support for most people is conditional. Not because they are cruel, but because they are human. We like to believe friendship is constant, that loyalty is automatic, that if people care about us, they will stand beside us no matter what. But reality is more complicated. Most relationships are built around shared certainty, not shared uncertainty. People are comfortable showing up when the path is clear. They struggle when the outcome is unknown. When you decide to pursue something difficult, something that hasn't been validated yet, you are asking people to stand in uncertainty with you. You are asking them to believe without evidence, to invest emotionally without guarantees, and that's a big ask. For many, it's simply too uncomfortable, so they don't leave loudly. They drift quietly, they stop asking how it's going, they change the subject, they become busy, not because they dislike you, but because your journey reminds them of risk, of effort. Oh, dreams they once had but didn't protect. Your uncertainty becomes a mirror, and not everyone likes what they see. This is why it feels personal even when it isn't. We interpret distance as rejection. We assume absence means betrayal. But often it's neither. It's self-preservation. People move toward what feels safe, predictable, and socially approved. And until you win, your path doesn't offer those things. The uncomfortable truth is this: effort without results makes people uneasy. There's no story to tell yet, no headline, no clear explanation for why you're sacrificing so much. And humans are storytellers. We like beginnings, middles, and ends. When someone is stuck in the messy middle, it doesn't fit neatly into conversation, so support becomes theoretical. I hope it works out. Good luck with that. Polite words that sound encouraging but require no commitment. Conditional support doesn't mean fake support. It means cautious support. And caution is the default setting for most people. This is where resentment can quietly grow if you're not careful. You start keeping score. You remember who showed up and who didn't. You replay conversations. You wonder why people who once believed in you now seem distant. And if you're not intentional, bitterness can creep in, but bitterness is heavy, and it slows you down. There's another way to see this. Instead of asking why people aren't supporting you, ask what kind of support your journey actually requires right now. In the early stages, applause doesn't help. Advice often confuses. Opinions distract. What you need most is clarity and stamina, and those things are built internally, not socially. Conditional support teaches you something essential: how to keep going without emotional guarantees. It forces you to detach your self-worth from other people's engagement. You stop measuring progress by who's watching and start measuring it by whether the work is getting done. And that shift is powerful because when people are with you only when it's comfortable, you learn to become comfortable with yourself. You learn to trust your own judgment. You learn to make decisions without consensus. That's not arrogance, that's independence. Here's the irony: the same people who hesitate to support you early will often celebrate you loudly later. They will share your success, quote your words, and tell others they knew you when. And again, it's not hypocrisy, it's timing. Once you win, your story makes sense. Once you win, your risk looks intentional instead of reckless. Winning changes the narrative. Before results, your choices are questioned. After results, they're admired. The actions don't change. The interpretation does. That's how conditional support works. People don't follow effort, they follow evidence. Understanding this doesn't make you cynical. It makes you grounded. You stop expecting people to give what they don't have. Not everyone has the capacity to sit in uncertainty. Not everyone has the emotional margin to cheer without proof. And that's okay. What matters is how you respond. If you chase approval, you'll start shaping your journey to be more acceptable, not more meaningful. You'll water down ambition to keep people comfortable. You'll slow down progress to avoid making others feel left behind. And in doing so, you risk abandoning yourself. But if you accept conduit, ional support for what it is, you free yourself from needing it. You don't cut people off. You don't become cold. You simply stop outsourcing motivation. You let people show up where they can without demanding more. This is where true confidence is built, not from being constantly encouraged, but from continuing even when encouragement is absent, not from being understood, but from being committed. And here's the quiet reward: when you eventually win, the relationships that remain feel different. The few who stayed, who checked in without needing updates, who respected your silence, those connections deepen. Not because they were loud, but because they were steady. Everyone else, they didn't betray you. They simply joined when it was safe. So don't be angry about conditional support. Learn from it. Let it teach you how rare consistency is and how valuable your own belief must become. Let it show you that friendship, like leadership, is revealed under pressure, not promised in comfort. Because in the end, the goal isn't to be surrounded by people while you struggle. The goal is to become someone who can keep moving forward even when the room goes quiet. There is a hard truth most people don't like to hear, especially in a world obsessed with hustle, motivation, and potential. The world does not reward effort. It rewards results. Effort feels noble. Effort feels honest. But effort on its own is invisible. And invisibility is uncomfortable when you're the one doing the work. From the inside, effort feels exhausting. Late nights, early mornings, sacrifices no one sees. You feel every ounce of discipline it takes to show up when you're tired, to continue when rest feels slow, to stay consistent when quitting would be easier. You know how much work you're putting in, but the world doesn't live inside your head. The world only sees outcomes. This is where frustration begins. You expect recognition because you're working hard. You expect understanding because you're giving everything you have. But what you get instead is silence, or worse, indifference. And it feels unfair, because in your mind, effort should count for something. But the uncomfortable reality is this: effort only matters to the person making it. Everyone else is waiting for proof. That doesn't make people heartless, it makes them practical. Results are tangible, they reduce uncertainty, they create clarity, they give people something to point to and say, now I get it. Until then, your effort is just a story, and stories without endings are hard to believe in. This is why validation almost always comes late. People don't celebrate the nights you stayed disciplined. They celebrate the day it finally worked. They don't applaud the consistency, they applaud the breakthrough. And when that breakthrough happens, something strange occurs. The same people who question you begin to rewrite the past. They say things like, I always knew you'd make it. They say, I could see this coming. They say, you were built for this. And it can feel insulting because you remember the silence, you remember the doubt, you remember the lack of interest. But here's the truth. Most people miss those statements aren't lies, they're reconstructions. People reinterpret history based on outcomes. Once success is visible, belief feels obvious. Results have a way of simplifying stories. Before results, your effort looks like risk. After results, it looks like vision. The work didn't change, the meaning assigned to it did. And that's the danger of chasing validation too early. If you rely on recognition before results, you'll constantly feel overlooked. You'll measure your worth by reactions instead of progress. This is where discipline becomes more important than motivation. Motivation feeds on validation. Discipline does not. Discipline is built on identity, on the decision that you are the kind of person who shows up regardless of applause. When you understand that validation follows results, not effort, you stop waiting for permission to continue. You don't announce every move. You don't explain every sacrifice. You don't seek approval for every decision. You work, and that work over time compounds, quietly, unseen, until one day it becomes undeniable. This is why so many people quit just before things change. They mistake lack of validation for lack of progress. They assume that because no one is noticing, nothing is happening. But progress rarely announces itself. It accumulates. And accumulation looks boring from the outside. Think about it. The most meaningful transformations are invisible until they're complete. Strength is built long before it's displayed. Trust is earned long before it's acknowledged. Mastery is developed long before it's recognized. Validation is a lagging indicator. By the time people notice, the real work is already done. And if you're not careful, that's where ego can creep in. When recognition finally arrives, there's a temptation to say, now they see me. But the deeper lesson is this: you didn't need them to see you in order to become who you are. That's the power of understanding this truth. When you accept that effort won't be celebrated, you stop performing it. You stop doing the work to be seen and start doing it because it's necessary, because it aligns with who you're trying to become, because it serves something bigger than applause. And paradoxically, that's when results accelerate, because energy that would have gone into explaining, proving, and defending is now fully invested in execution. There's no emotional tax of disappointment, no resentment about being overlooked, just focus. This doesn't mean you shouldn't be proud of your effort. It means you should be proud privately. You should measure yourself by standards you control, not by reactions you don't. Effort becomes meaningful not when it's noticed, but when it's sustained. And when the results finally arrive, and they will if the effort is aligned and consistent, validation will follow. It always does. Not because people suddenly care more, but because they now understand more. So when recognition comes late, don't be bitter. Be calm. Let it remind you that you built something without needing applause, that you proved something to yourself before anyone else agreed. Because in the end, effort is the price you pay. Results are the receipt and validation. That's just the echo that comes after the work has already spoken. There is a moment on every meaningful journey when the silence feels heavier than usual. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that makes you question yourself. You look around and it feels like no one is walking beside you. No encouragement, no recognition, just distance. And in that moment, it's easy to believe something is wrong. But often that loneliness isn't a warning. It's a signal. Loneliness shows up early. It shows up before things make sense to anyone else. It shows up when the direction you're moving in hasn't been validated yet. And because humans are social by nature, being alone feels unnatural. Our instinct tells us that if no one is following, maybe the path is wrong. But history shows us the opposite is often true. When you're early, there are no crowds. Being early means operating without confirmation. It means making decisions without examples. It means trusting something that doesn't yet exist in visible form. And most people are not comfortable living there. They prefer proven paths, established systems, familiar routines. When you step outside of that, you step into isolation by default. That isolation can feel personal. You start to wonder why people don't check in, why your progress doesn't seem to matter, why conversations feel shallow or distant. But what you're experiencing isn't rejection, it's timing. You're in a phase where the work hasn't created a shared language yet. Loneliness isn't about being unwanted, it's about being ahead of understanding. Think about any idea that eventually changed something. A business, a movement, a mindset. In the beginning, there were very few believers, not because the idea was weak, but because it was unfamiliar. Familiarity creates comfort. Comfort attracts people. Until then, the journey belongs to the few willing to walk without reassurance. This is where many people turn back. Not because the work is too hard, but because the loneliness becomes too loud. They crave belonging more than growth. So they abandon what matters to rejoin what feels safe. And the tragedy isn't that they failed, it's that they never found out who they could have become. Loneliness is not a flaw in the process, it is the process. It forces you to confront your reasons. When no one is watching, when no one is praising you, you are left with a simple question: why am I doing this? And if the answer depends on approval, the journey will end early. But if the answer is rooted in purpose, loneliness becomes bearable, even meaningful. Because in solitude, clarity forms. Without constant feedback, you hear your own voice more clearly. You stop adjusting your direction to fit expectations. You stop compromising the vision to make it more palatable. You begin to act from conviction instead of consensus. And that's when the work gains integrity. There's a quiet strength that develops in this phase. You learn how to self-regulate doubt. You learn how to encourage yourself. You learn how to continue, even when progress feels invisible. These are not glamorous skills, but they are essential. Because later, when attention arrives, when opinions multiply, when pressure increases, the ability to stand alone becomes the ability to stand firm. The irony is that loneliness often disappears the moment you no longer fear it. When you stop interpreting solitude as failure, it transforms into focus. Time that would have been spent seeking reassurance is now spent building. Energy that would have gone into comparison is now invested in craft. And slowly, quietly, things start to shift. Not dramatically, not overnight, but incrementally. The work improves, the results sharpen, the direction becomes clearer, and one day, without announcing it, others begin to notice. Questions replace doubt, curiosity replaces indifference. The room feels less empty, but by then you are different. You don't need the crowd the way you once did. You're grateful for connection, but not dependent on it. You understand that belonging built too early can weaken conviction, that approval before readiness can derail progress. Loneliness taught you how to lead yourself before leading others. And this is the lesson most people miss. Loneliness doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It often means you're doing something new, something untested, something that hasn't been translated for others yet. Every pioneer knows this feeling. Every builder has felt this gap between effort and acknowledgement. It's the space where identity is forged, where resilience is built, where purpose stops being a theory and becomes a commitment. So if you feel alone right now, don't rush to escape it. Don't fill the silence just to feel normal again. Sit with it, learn from it, let it refine you. Because when the crowd eventually arrives, and it will if the work is honest, you'll understand something most never do. The loneliness didn't weaken you. It prepared you. You weren't abandoned. You were early. And being early is lonely by design. There's a common assumption that success changes people. That when someone finally wins, they become different. Colder, distant, arrogant, selective. But that assumption misses the point. Winning doesn't change character. It reveals it. It doesn't create new relationships as much as it clarifies existing ones. Success doesn't suddenly make people care. It simply removes ambiguity. Before you win, everything is blurry. Intentions are unclear, support is theoretical, loyalty is spoken but untested. People can say they believe in you without having to prove it. They can offer encouragement without commitment. But once you win, the fog lifts, the story becomes simple. You made it. And that simplicity forces everyone, including you, to see relationships for what they really are. Success acts like a spotlight. It doesn't manufacture alignment. It exposes it. The people who were comfortable with your uncertainty, who respected your silence, who didn't need constant updates to stay connected, those people don't suddenly appear after you win. They were already there, quietly, patiently, often unnoticed, and when success arrives, their presence feels familiar, not surprising. Then there are others, people who re-enter your life with enthusiasm once outcomes are visible. They celebrate loudly. They share your achievements. They speak as if they were part of the journey. And again, it's tempting to see this as betrayal or opportunism. But more often, it's human behavior responding to clarity. They didn't know how to engage before. Now they do. Winning doesn't mean you owe anyone access. This is a critical lesson. When success arrives, there is a sudden increase in attentio. And opinions multiply, requests grow, expectations rise. And without awareness, it's easy to mistake visibility for obligation. You feel pressure to be available, to be agreeable, to maintain connections that were absent when the road was uncertain. But access is not the same as alignment. Just because someone celebrates your win doesn't mean they understand your values. Just because someone supports the outcome doesn't mean they respect the process. Winning gives you the opportunity to choose relationships more intentionally, not from ego, but from clarity. This is where many people struggle. They feel guilty for changing boundaries. They worry about being perceived as ungrateful. But boundaries are not a response to success, they are a response to understanding. You now know what it took to get here. You know the cost. And that knowledge changes what you are willing to give. The relationships that survive success are the ones built on something deeper than proximity or convenience. They are built on shared principles, mutual respect, a willingness to grow independently without resentment. These relationships don't compete with your purpose, they complement it. And here's the quiet truth, the absence of certain people during your rise didn't stop you. That alone tells you something important. You didn't need their presence to progress. You didn't need their approval to persist. You didn't need their validation to become who you are. Success didn't fill a void. It revealed that the void wasn't essential. This realization can be both empowering and sobering. Empowering because you recognize your own resilience. Sobering because it challenges the stories you once told yourself about who would be there at the end. But clarity, even when uncomfortable, is a gift. It allows you to invest energy where it actually matters. Winning also changes how you listen. You become more discerning. You've seen how easy it is for opinions to shift once results appear, so you stop taking praise too seriously and criticism too personally. You understand that most reactions are responses to outcomes, not insights into truth. This balance is what keeps success from distorting character. When you don't let admiration inflate you and you don't let past absence harden you, you stay grounded. You don't become cynical, you become selective. And selectivity isn't rejection, it's responsibility. Because success, when handled poorly, can isolate you. But when handled with intention, it can deepen the right connections. The goal isn't to shrink your world, it's to align it. Winning gives you the chance to revisit old relationships with new eyes. Not to judge, but to understand. Some will naturally fade, others will strengthen. And a few will surprise you, not because they changed, but because you now have the clarity to see them fully. And perhaps the most important lesson is this: winning is not the finish line. It's a transition. The work doesn't stop. The purpose doesn't disappear. If anything, responsibility increases, and the relationships you carry forward should support that responsibility, not distract from it. So when success arrives and people say, "You've changed," listen carefully. Sometimes what they really mean is, "You've stopped being accessible in the ways I was comfortable with." And that's not a flaw. That's growth. You didn't lose friends. You gained understanding. Winning didn't make you different. It made things clear, and clarity, when respected, is one of the greatest forms of freedom. At the end of it all, the lesson is not about silence or grinding or winning. The lesson is about understanding how belief works, in you and in others. It's about recognizing that the journey toward anything meaningful is not designed to be crowded at the beginning. It's designed to test commitment before it earns applause. Grinding in silence was never about hiding from people. It was about discovering who you are without their opinions. It was about learning how to move forward without permission, encouragement, or certainty. Because if your belief only survives when others agree with you, it was never belief to begin with. It was dependency. Along the way, you learn something uncomfortable but freeing. Not everyone who smiles at your dream can walk with you through uncertainty. Support fades not because people are cruel, but because most are waiting for proof. And that waiting creates loneliness. But loneliness is not rejection. It is the space where identity is forged and purpose becomes personal. You learn that effort doesn't come with trophies, that discipline is quiet, that the world only notices outcomes, not sacrifices. And instead of letting that make you bitter, it made you focused. You stopped performing the work and started embodying it. You stopped asking to be seen and started becoming undeniable. And when winning finally arrived, it didn't fill a void, it exposed one. It revealed which relationships were built on alignment and which were built on convenience. Success didn't make people loyal, it made loyalty visible. It didn't change who you were, it clarified who belonged. This is the truth about grinding in silence. It prepares you for success long before success shows up. It teaches you how to lead yourself before others follow. It teaches you how to stand alone without becoming lonely, and how to welcome others without losing direction. So if you're still in the quiet phase, don't rush it. Don't explain it. Don't announce it. Let the work shape you before it introduces you, because one day the noise will come, the attention will follow. And when it does, you'll be ready. Not because people finally believe in you, but because you learn to believe in yourself first. That is how you win.